No one saw it. No one heard it. But that day in that field, the fate of Africa changed. Ibrahim Traoré wiped sweat from his brow as he finished helping local farmers plant millet in the fields outside Bobo Dioulasso. His security detail stood, uncomfortably in the heat, some wondering why their president was kneeling in the mud planting seeds despite his position of power. The sharp ring of a phone cut through the morning stillness. "Mr. President," said the tense voice of Foreign Minister Ouedraogo, "the European delegation has increased their offer to $7 million. A moment of silence. "They need your answer today." As Traoré pressed the phone to his ear, his eyes fixed on the golden millet fields shimmering in the distance under the sun. He reached a decision, though no one yet knew the consequences, not even himself. "Minister Ouedraogo," Traoré said, his voice carrying a calm determination, "tell them I'll consider their offer. They'll have my answer in 1 hour." After hanging up, Amadou, the elderly farmer beside him, looked at him with curious eyes. "Something important, Mr. President?" Traoré smiled, watching the soil particles in his palm. "The Europeans think so, Amadou Baba. But some decisions," he slowly poured the soil from his hand, "like these seeds, must be planted at the right time." At midday, Traoré's convoy moved toward the presidential palace in Ouagadougou through clouds of dust. Through the car window, he watched children running barefoot from school and women carrying water vessels on their heads returning to their villages. In every corner of this land, once a French colony, there was a centuries-old story, the flow of resources, outward, always outward. When he arrived at the presidential palace, his advisor Marie's worried expression reminded him of the tension awaiting him. "Mr. President," she said, lowering her voice, "Monsieur Lefebvre, the representative of the French-Swiss consortium, has been waiting since morning. Some diplomats from the European Union are with him." Marie's eyes noticed Traoré's mud-stained shirt and the soil on his hands. "10 minutes," said Traoré. "I need to shower and change clothes first." "But sir," Marie protested, her fingers nervously crumpling the edges of her files. "They've been waiting for 5 hours, and Lefebvre seems quite irritated." Traoré responded with a calm smile, but the look in his eyes was steel. "And they can wait 10 more minutes. As an African leader, I should look my best for our European guests, shouldn't I?" Marie smiled, understanding what her boss really meant. Waiting was a show of power. 15 minutes later, a deliberately chosen 5-minute delay, Traoré stood at the conference room door. Instead of his red beret and military uniform, he wore traditional Burkina Faso attire, an earth-toned tunic embroidered with rich patterns. This was a conscious choice. "Monsieur Lefebvre," Traoré said, extending his hand. "I apologize for keeping you waiting. I was working in the fields with my people." Jean-Philippe Lefebvre, sweating in his gray suit, rose to his feet with a forced smile. "President Traoré, I understand that's precisely why we're here, to help develop your country's agricultural potential." As Traoré gestured for him to sit, he said, "Frankly, your interest surprises me, since your offer involves expanding the Kambi mines in a way that would destroy our fertile farmland." Lefebvre cast a nervous glance at the other European diplomats. "President Traoré, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Our offer is an opportunity for Burkina Faso's development. $7 million, directly into your country's treasury." Traoré listened carefully. "And what exactly does your offer include, Monsieur Lefebvre?" Lefebvre pulled out a file from his elegant leather briefcase. "A simple agreement, Mr. President. The transfer of mining rights in the Kambi region to our consortium for 20 years. In return, Burkina Faso will receive $7 million in cash, plus jobs for 100 people in the region and construction of a small school." The tension in the room was almost palpable. Traoré took the file and began slowly turning its pages. $7 million, he said thoughtfully. "Sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it?" Lefebvre nodded eagerly. "Absolutely, Mr. President. A significant investment for your country." Traoré smiled, though his eyes remained cold. "May I share something with you, Monsieur Lefebvre?" "Of course, Mr. President. This morning I was working with a farmer in the field." His name is Amadou. He's 80 years old and has cultivated these lands all his life. He showed me a seed passed down from his grandfather, a special type of millet preserved for generations. The European diplomats looked at each other uneasily, wondering where this conversation was heading. Amadou told me one must know the value of seeds, because the right seed planted in the right soil at the right time can feed a nation's future. Traoré stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city was bathed in golden sunset light. The streets were filled with people returning home. "The uranium in our soil, Monsieur Lefebvre?" Traoré turned slowly, his eyes now aflame. "Do you know what it's worth?" Lefebvre cleared his throat, loosening his tie slightly. "Of course it depends on market fluctuations, but according to recent estimates," Traoré continued, his voice precise and sharp, "the reserves in the Combi region alone are worth $2.5 billion, and you're offering us $7 million. The oxygen in the room suddenly seemed depleted. No one moved. President Traoré, one of the European diplomats, interjected, his voice conciliatory. "This agreement is just a beginning. We're bringing technology and expertise to operate the mines. Infrastructure, jobs, future." "Ah, yes," said Traoré. Returning to his desk, each step measured. Technology and expertise. The words left a bitter taste in his mouth. Along with toxic waste, displaced communities, and the exploitation of our resources that has continued for centuries. Traoré placed the agreement gently on the table. For a long moment, he just looked at the papers as if fighting an internal battle. Then, in an unexpected move, he elegantly tore the pages in half. "I reject your offer, gentlemen." A shocked silence filled the room. Watching the change in Lefebvre's expression was a show in itself. Surprise, disbelief, then anger. "But Mr. President," Lefebvre stammered, his hands pressed against the table as he stood up. "This agreement would greatly benefit your country. Besides, if we don't operate these mines, others will. The Chinese are already waiting at the door." Traoré was aware of the growing fear in the man's eyes. This fear was familiar, the fear of losing control. "You're right, Monsieur Lefebvre," he said, quietly sitting down. "That's why we're going to operate our own mines." Lefebvre's laugh was a sarcastic bark. "How? Where will you get the technology, the expertise, the capital?" "The world is changing," said Traoré, his hands calmly clasped in front of him. "Africa is changing too. Today, I'm launching the Burkina Faso National Mining Initiative. First, we will train our own engineers. Temporarily, we'll work with South African, Russian, and Brazilian partners. And yes, maybe we'll make less profit, maybe it will take longer. But in the end, these resources will benefit our people." Lefebvre, his face red with anger, stood up. His fists were clenched, knuckles white. "This is a mistake, President Traoré," he said, practically spitting each word. "Like all the mistakes people like you have made in the past, you cannot succeed without the West. You never have." Tension filled the room. While the other diplomats exchanged nervous glances, Traoré's security team went on alert. But Traoré's eyes hardened, though his voice remained calm, almost compassionate. "That's where you're wrong, Monsieur Lefebvre. We can succeed, and we will." Silence in the room. "This meeting is over," said Traoré, standing up. "Good day, gentlemen." After the diplomats left the palace, Marie entered the president's office. Her face wore a worried expression. She was considering the consequences of this decision. "Mr. President," she said, her voice a mixture of fear and admiration, "the opposition will pressure the mining companies. The media will criticize this decision. Foreign governments will threaten sanctions." Traoré looked out the window at the homes with lights coming on in the evening darkness and smiled. He didn't even know what he owed his calmness to. "Yes, Marie, all of that will happen. And that doesn't frighten you?" "Of course it frightens me," he said honestly, his face now serious. "But you know, great changes always meet resistance. It's never been easy in history." He paused, looking at the distant mountains. "Trade partners who aren't willing to support us now will come to work with us as equals in the future, because respect is a stronger motivator than fear." Marie blinked. Those words, I feel like I've heard them before? Traoré laughed softly. From Amadou Baba. Sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the humblest sources. 3 weeks later, the sun shone over the Kambi region. Traoré was there with Amadou by his side. Traoré had appointed him as an honorary advisor to the National Mining Initiative. Their first task was to attend a groundbreaking ceremony for a new technical school. The school would train the next generation of Burkina Faso engineers. Among those present at the ceremony were villagers, students, former miners, and several international journalists. Traoré's decision had, surprisingly, attracted worldwide attention. From a hill near the ceremony site, Jean-Philippe Lefebvre watched the scene through binoculars. Beside him stood Marcel Dubois, the consortium's director of covert operations. "This is ridiculous," said Lefebvre angrily, a bitter grin on his face. "Years will pass before this school is built. And then what? These farmer children will operate our mines?" "Not our mines anymore," Dubois reminded him, his voice uneasy. "Let it go," said Lefebvre, laughing loudly. Though his laugh was hollow, his voice shrill. "They'll go bankrupt in a few months, the money will run out, political pressure will increase, and then we'll come back, offering less money this time." "What if they succeed?" asked Dubois, his eyes fixed on the enthusiastic crowd below. Lefebvre thought for a long time before answering. "Then, my friend, it means the world is changing. And perhaps we need to change too." Below, at the ceremony, Traoré stepped up to the microphone. Hundreds of Burkinabe, farmers, students, miners, gathered around him. The sun shone on him like a crown. "Today," he said, his voice strong and clear, "we are not just building a school. We are building our future. With our own hands, with our own knowledge. The resources of Africa belong to Africans." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Amadou watched the president proudly with tears in his eyes. "Ibrahim," he said softly, the wrinkles on his face like deep valleys. "My grandfather always said that a leader should work not to leave an inheritance to his children, but to leave a country to his children. You are making these words real." Traoré embraced the old man, his eyes full of gratitude. "Without teachers like you, Amadou Baba, I wouldn't be here today." A week later, international media began to headline news about Burkina Faso. Initially, most were mocking and skeptical, seeing it as just another failed African project. But things started to change. News came that consultants from Johannesburg had completed their initial assessments of the Kambi mines and reported that the reserves were 30% larger than expected. A few days later, the Burkina Faso government announced the first engineering scholarships. 200 young Burkinabe would be sent for training to Russia, Brazil, South Africa, and Malaysia. Speaking at the United Nations building in New York, Burkina Faso's foreign minister said, "Those who want to help Africa now must learn a new language, the language of respect." The speech went viral, shared millions of times. 6 months later, Traoré was invited to a special meeting in Paris. This was a development no one had expected. The meeting included Europe's leading mining companies, including Lefebvre and the consortium. This time the offer was different. Technical support, training programs, and fair profit sharing. 65% of Burkina Faso's resources would remain with the country. In the meeting room, Traoré and Lefebvre sat face to face. The atmosphere between them was dramatically different from months ago. "What changed?" asked Traoré after examining the new offer, his eyes questioning Lefebvre. After a long silence, his fingers tense on the edge of the table, Lefebvre said, "You changed, President Traoré." Then he added, "And maybe we've changed a little, too." After the meeting, walking on the glittering streets of Paris, the side-by-side image of Lefebvre and Traoré created an interesting contrast, one in an expensive Italian suit, the other still in traditional Burkina Faso attire. "You know, Monsieur Lefebvre," said Traoré, "I've realized something. True independence isn't about rejecting foreigners. It's about sitting at the table as equals." The two men shook hands, this time without any apparent power struggle, with respect and understanding. When Traoré returned to Burkina Faso, a large crowd greeted him at the airport. Amadou was at the front smiling proudly. "I signed the agreement," Traoré told the old man, "but on our terms, for the benefit of our people." Amadou nodded, his eyes shining with wisdom. "You refused $7 million and now you've established a partnership worth billions. How did you accomplish this, Ibrahim?" Traoré shrugged, smiling humbly, with the wisdom of a simple farmer. "Amadou Baba. I knew the value of the seed, and I planted it at the right time." In the evening, as Traoré sat alone in his room, he looked at the lights of Ouagadougou through his window. What once seemed impossible to him was now happening. The pride and hope he saw on his people's faces made all the difficulties and risks worthwhile. In the distance, from the hilltop, Jean-Philippe Lefebvre and his colleagues watched the scene. This time, there were no arrogant smiles on their faces. "Dog, you learn anything from this?" asked Dubois, his eyes focused on a small point in the crowd below. Traoré Lefebvre nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he finally said, his voice low and reflective. "Africa doesn't need to be saved. It needs to be respected." The next day, the world press carried the new agreement in their headlines. Traoré's stand pays off. The West offers Burkina Faso respectful terms. But the most important headline hadn't been written: a leader's courage to refuse millions of dollars for the future of his people. This was the kind of courage and wisdom not written in books. Ibrahim Traoré, with the decision he made that day in the field, had changed not just a mind's fate but a nation's destiny.